Alright, so let's give this a go. In this video we're going to be talking about the workflow from Maya all the way into Photoshop or into Nuke, but getting it from rendered out. Okay, so this is using VRed. I'm going to show some stuff in there, and then I'm also going to show some KeyShot stuff. So we kind of have to work backwards, obviously, to figure out what we need to do, and this is just a common thing based on whichever program you go into. VRed and KeyShot both have their benefits. So let's start at Photoshop. So in Photoshop we want to get a final image, and so D drive. And so inside here I have some rendered images that I want to get out. That one will work. Alright, so here's a finished-ish image. This was rendered out of Maya, so we eventually want to get, or out of KeyShot. I want to get to this point where I have an image inside Photoshop that I can play with. And using some of the features from the other programs, that's what we want to ideally play with. Okay, so we know that we want to get to Photoshop so we can start playing with it and customizing it, recoloring and adjusting and whatever else. In order to do that, we're going to go through KeyShot or VRed. So I'm going to start off with KeyShot because it's kind of like the simpler version of this. So the interface is pretty simple. The only thing that kind of is weird, like up here, there's no there's import right there. Import's like way here. I'm used to it being down there. That's the only weird thing right there. But I usually use this bottom button. So we go to import, and I'm going to click on the file formats and look at all the different file formats that it will accept. So if we're coming from Maya, you'll see that it does allow Maya files to come in here. But if we came from ZBrush, it doesn't allow your ZBrush project. So you may have to export it as an OBJ, an FBX, or a Maya file. Okay. So in this case, I'm just going to grab some stuff that I have here. I'll grab that tentacle, okay, and we'll open it up. And you'll get this info box saying, you know, do you want to center it? Do you want to snap to the ground, keep original? Right now I have it set up to keep original on all my stuff, because if I bring in multiple items, multiple files, it typically doesn't come in the right spots. So I just leave it there and hit import. Now this may or may not actually import this file, because I might have other stuff inside this Maya file that are preventing me from doing that. If I have fur or hair, I've never brought it into KeyShot, but it's typically not meant for fur and hair and that kind of stuff. If I have history on, that may cause some issues bringing it in. So usually your best bets in any of these are OBJs or FBXs. Also, this file is huge, so that's why it's taking quite a bit longer. I'm just going to cancel that. Alright, so I canceled that Maya import one. I just want to show you inside Maya, you can go to File, Export Selection, and you can export it as an FBX. That's one way that we could do this, just choosing the export selection. And then make sure that we include any geometry that's in there. I typically like to delete any history before I do any exporting out, just to be safe. There's also an OBJ exporter, and you'll see way on the bottom here is OBJ export, and I can name that whatever. And if that doesn't show up, you have to go to your plugin manager, Windows Settings and Preferences plugin manager, and you'll have to load the OBJ export. OBJ export loaded. Okay, and you just export it out. Now this one that's loaded here, this is the OBJ, and it actually loaded a bit quicker than did the other one. So it's kind of important that sometimes you need OBJ because it's quicker or whatever. You can bring it in. Sometimes the Maya file will be quicker. All right. As for movements around, you don't have to use any hotkeys on the keyboard. The left mouse button is your spinner, and your middle mouse button is the mover, and then the right mouse button, the scroll wheel is your zooming in and out. Okay, So that's how you can navigate to move around different items here. Now this is just a renderer, okay? So the purpose of this is that it renders your stuff out. Now as we're going, you can see that as I spin around, it looks pretty grainy, but then when I let go, it gets smoother and smoother and smoother. So this is actually like rendering this out. Now this is the nice thing about KeyShot, is that all your stuff is kind of laid out right here. All right. So here's all your materials, colors, environments, backgrounds, textures, favorites. Now on the right side you have your scene, your materials, your environments, cameras, and settings. If I needed to move something, like this is maybe too big or too small, all my items are right here. So here's Tentacle from Maya, and I could open it up. And here's the initial shading group, and here is this stuff right there. So I could take this and I could go to position and I could go to scale and I could scale the whole thing down, and you can see how it automatically scales the entire thing down. I could also rotate it to get it into a different position as well. Okay, so you still can do some of those things. They're all just going to be in this box, as opposed to what we're used to doing is out here. And there might be other ways to do that. I just don't do it that way. I just do it this way. Maybe move tool. Yeah, there we go. So we could do it this way too. But typically you don't have to move it because it's already kind of set up from Maya. Typically the only thing I do is adjust the scaling or the rotate. Sometimes it'll come in rotated weird and I'll rotate it or scale it. Alright. So for materials, I need this to be a glass and then this to be a tentacle material. So if I come over here to my glass, there it is up top. Here's all these different glass materials that I could put on there. So if I wanted this outer container to be a frosted glass, I can grab this and drop the frosted glass right on it. And I can zoom in to see that better. Okay, now the more involved your stuff is, the longer it's going to take to actually see those settings. If I need to adjust my frosted glass, I come over here to my scene stuff, and I go to materials, and then I can click on the glass. There it goes. And I could play with maybe the color. Maybe I don't want it to be white. Maybe I'd rather this be more of like a blue glass. So now it's registered here, and then it's going to start adjusting this. I may have to rotate it a smidge. Start doing that. Okay. I'm going to take my color density up a little bit more. There it goes. I had to pull it down some. You can see that it is registering as more of a blue glass now instead of the clear glass. If I really crank it down, you can see that's definitely blue. Okay. So I don't expect you to remember what all these are, but because this is so quick, you can really just get in there and start playing with what that looks like. I would actually want this to be, in my final one that I do, I have this kind of like a green glass. There we go. All right. Green is kind of like a medical colors, and I want this to look kind of medical-y. So then we have the tentacle here. So for the tentacle, you know, there's no tentacle stuff here, so you have to kind of like look around. Like I believe I used a plastic and like something like rubber. All right. Now some of these do have bump maps on them. So if I drag this onto here, and I just hold it, you know, until it gets to the right one, and then let go. There we go. And here's tire. So if I'm on tire, under the textures, okay, there is no texture on this, but sometimes there will be like a texture loaded in one of these, and we can disable it. The look of this looks like there would be something, but that must be just the ball itself has that on there. All right. So I may not want this to be black. I may want this to be kind of an orangey color. There we go. Now I may want to go back to the glass too, and maybe make the glass a little bit more transparent. Oops. Keep that where it is. Pull my roughness down. I believe the roughness is what's driving the glossy or the scattering of this to make it so we can't see through it very good. I'll pull it really far down. There we go. Okay, hit it at a different angle. right. We can also go over here to colors, and they have actually like colors loaded. So if I wanted to drag color in here, I could get it from over there. And I believe I can just drop it right on top of there, and that would accept that color. So there we go. So it's pretty neat how they have that set up. Here's the environments. Right now it's set up to be a 3-point lighting, but I could swap this to an outdoor scene. Just drag it, which is really easy to use. So now my octopus tentacle is like in the middle of a forest. Nope, now it's in the middle of a desert. And it does all the setup for you, which is amazing. Okay, and then as I spin around, you can see I'm getting different areas of that specific image. So if I'm trying to show, hey, this thing is in the middle of a forest or whatever, there it is. And then all of these I can edit too. So I go to environment, here's that HDR, here's the file for that. I could rotate the file. So if I just wanted to keep him exactly where he was, but rotate that around, I could do that. I could add some ground reflections in there. I could flatten the ground, so it's not bumpy, it's just a flat ground. Play with the ground size. You know, obviously you can read what the buttons do. Okay. So for this, obviously it makes more sense. There's interiors also. It makes more sense to do like a 3-point lighting setup. Let me spin that around. There's my main light. I want that to be kind of hitting it. Maybe I don't like that one. Maybe I want that one. That's the great thing about this software, is that it's just so easy to just drag and drop stuff right in here. So let me get him framed up. So I'm going to get him framed like that. And then I'm just going to go to my environment and then rotate the environment so that those lights are more that way. Okay, so now these two hot lights are more in the front, and then this backlight is off to the side. Alright, then the other thing is, if you want to add your own light, there's no real way to add your own light in here. So what you have to do is add geometry. So you'd add like a cube or a disc or a plane or whatever. And in this instance, I've added this cube. And under the materials, I just searched for the word emissive. And it brought up a list of all the emissive ones. Okay, so it emits stuff. So I just drag this onto here. And then I can edit the material, and then I can play with the intensity of it. And this is basically adding a light into the scene. So I could say it's not visible to the camera, it's not visible in shadows or visible in reflections, but it is actually emitting light out of there. So if I made this $300, I'm going to change the color to maybe white. Okay, we're getting a little bit more lighting in the scene than if we didn't have that. Okay, and there's also a drop down here where we can pick what this is. So if I pick dielectric, it's a dielectric material, and if I choose this back to emissive, then it's an emissive material. Okay, so I'm just going to delete that object. And probably a plane or a disc would have been a better shape for that specific item. Alright, so I've enabled just ground reflections and ground, flattened ground in this one. And it gives me a more flatter color. I'm also going to go under here to settings, and then right now it's just self shadow. I could turn on global illumination, and you'll see how the light from our lights up here are actually bouncing and lighting up the bottom of this a little bit better than it was before. So having that global illumination definitely helps. Ground illumination could help to just kind of bounce some of this lighting around. And focus caustics. So now we're getting some more caustic stuff introduced here. I don't want to go too crazy in this. There we go. Because it actually, like, I don't know if you can see it real quick, but it puts a weird pattern on these from the grain and whatever else. All right, so now let's say we want to get this out of here. Under the render menu, you see this pause real-time rendering. So if you're doing a bunch of changes, you may not want this on. So you could pause this, and what that means is it's not going to update. So if you're doing something in Maya, you're doing something in Photoshop, this is still in the background trying to update, so you may not want that to happen. So definitely pause it. We have our perspective here, so if we want to change what the perspective on our camera is, we can definitely do that. There we go. Or if you really want to distort it, you can see how much more perspective there is at 5, right? So let's set that back to 50. Okay. So then we have settings here. This is where you're kind of setting up like what your resolution is going to be. So 1920 by 1080 is a good resolution. You can see where the bounding boxes are. Under the render, that's where it'll actually pull up your render settings. So in this case, in most cases, you're still going to work with just a still image, but there's also room for animation, where you could set up an animation inside here. There's a timeline that'll pop up. So typically I like to save as an EXR, because you'll get the most information. Change my presets to 1920 by 1080. Real-time centerings, that's fine. So give this a name, tentacle out, Seacrest out. Quality, a bunch of advanced controls here. I typically just go to the maximum samples. And if 32 doesn't work out, then you could up it to 64. There's queues, so you could add jobs and cameras if you have more than that stuff. Passes, depth pass, geometry pass, clown pass, render layers. These are all good things to have inside here that you render out. And then you'd hit render. All right, now if I close that and I go back into it, you'll see all that stuff saved, so there's no harm in playing with some other stuff before we get into that. Don't be afraid to go in the menus, show full screen presentation mode, and poke around a little bit, because you really find that there's a lot of stuff that maybe you want to explore and look at a little bit better. Okay, so there's lots of different things that you could adjust and look at and maybe tweak to play with your settings here. Here's all those settings again that we were playing with before: self shadow, global illumination, ground illumination. So my global illumination seems to have gone away. All right, I'm going to take my bounces up to maybe 8, and my shadow quality maybe up to 2. Spherical position, I'm just seeing whatever else we have in here that I may want to adjust. You can do depth of field inside here too, so if you have more than one object, you can do depth of field. Where's your focus distance, what's your f-stop, and then bloom effects. I like to do all that in Photoshop and just kind of fake it. And I think that's it. Alright, should be good. Alright, so render, and then render. And then what this is going to do is it's going to go through and do an actual render, and you'll be able to see it on the screen. And once it's done, then it'll output it to your hard drive. And right now you see it's 3%, 4 cores, 12 seconds so far, 5%. Okay, so once this is done, I'm just going to stop that. Once this is done inside of Photoshop, keeps jumping me back to here, wants me to do something. We'll have our tentacle rendering. So I just have to see where my tentacle rendering went to. I believe that's it there. Yep. Alright, so I just hit as alpha for each one of those items that got brought in. And I just exported everything out just so you can see what everything is. So here is my original image here. Here's a clown pass, and you'll see that with this, because this is glass, we're not seeing the tentacle inside it. But typically if you have like two hard objects, like this is metal and this is metal, or this is plastic and that's plastic, I could use this clown pass to isolate different areas I want to select. So if I just want to select this, I could use my magic wand, which doesn't seem to be working, and I could pick that color, and I could use it as a mask to edit just that color, or just this color here. I also have the depth. It's going slow. And if I go to my info here, it's pretty much like maxed out in this case because Photoshop's reading this. The info stuff here doesn't really read all that information. But if I pull this down, it should read it better. Now this is actually Photoshop, so Photoshop's not reading it very good, but Nuke would read this a lot better. And then we have our normals pass, which for what we're doing, we don't need to play with it. Come on. Alright, so I open that depth file up inside Nuke, and you can see in here, as my mouse hovers over these areas, the red, green, and blue that are down there are changing. So it's reading the depth. It's actually reading like how far from the camera each one of these items are, and I can use that as a way to create depth of field. Now, the idea with this is that we want to be able to edit it. We want to be able to adjust and tweak and really modify what this looks like. So in this case, I do some very simple stuff just inside of Photoshop, is that maybe I'll throw on here a photo filter. I mean, it doesn't have to be complex. It's just, you know, you want to adjust it somewhat. Okay, so I've added this green color here, which just kind of pushes it more towards the green and kind of more towards the creepy. I like to put on a vignette at the end too. What I also like to do is go to this blur gallery and do an iris blur. And it's pretty sweet because it basically allows you to fake depth of field. Takes a minute to load up. Alright, here we go. So we have a couple things. This outer ring is the depth or the extent of our blur, like where it is basically like blurry beyond this. The inner rings is where it starts to blur. Okay, and then this circle in the middle is where the center of this blur is. So as I drag this, okay, because my focus is like maybe that. And I can pull these up. Even though they look like rotators, you can rotate them, but I can also pull it up. Okay, and there it is. So now I have basically the center of this is in focus, and then it just kind of softens the edges around here, which is pretty neat. And then I could lessen that by clicking and dragging this bar, or if I really want to exaggerate it. Okay, typically you want to stay subtle with this. And I could take this whole thing and make it bigger like that, but then pull in these things here. And if I hold Alt, I can individually grab them and tweak what they're individually doing. Alright, so it's pretty neat how that works. Then I just hit OK. I can set high quality and hit OK. And now I'll have this softened version, which looks like it has depth of field on it, but it in no way, shape, or form has actual depth of field on it. It just looks like it has depth of field, which is pretty neat. So then what I do is at the end, I grab everything. My hotkeys seem to just not want to work all the time. I Control-Shift-C. I go above my photo filter. I Control-V to paste it. So this is basically just a flattened out version of what we just had. I go to Multiply, and this darkens the entire thing. And then I just put a circle in the middle. Like so. I filter it, or feather it a lot. So this is 1900 pixels wide, so I might feather it like 300 pixels. And then I invert it. Select invert. It's starting to go slow now because I have all these windows open. Typically, I don't have everything open. I like to go to Maya, then go to here, then go to there. But for this, I have all these extra windows open. There we go. And then I'll just put a layer mask on it. Okay. So now that just kind of emphasizes more of that center area and less of this corner area, right? So now this is a 32-bit image, so if I were to save this as, you'll see my options are pretty limited. Photoshop, EXR, whatever. I always save everything as a PSD, so I'd save this as tentacle demo. Okay, with all my layers and all my fun stuff. And then after that's saved, I'll go to my mode. I'll set this down to 8-bit. Doesn't matter, but I'll say don't merge. And then I will save this as a JPEG. Okay, and the JPEG is something that you could share online, where a lot of websites don't let you upload TIFFs. So you could definitely turn that or upload that to ArtStation or Facebook or wherever. All right. So that's typically the workflow going from Maya into KeyShot into Photoshop. All right. So just for the sake of speediness of my computer, let me start closing some of the stuff down. I don't need to save that. I'm going to close Maya too, because we've already seen how to export and how to get our stuff in and out. Photoshop's closed there. We'll close these other windows that I have open. All right, so now let's get into VRed. And VRed is much more advanced than KeyShot, but it's also more expensive. So if you work at a company, maybe they'll use KeyShot, maybe they'll use VRed. So here, importing stuff, so you can import certain things. The difference is you go to add in this one instead of import. So they have an import, don't use the import, use the add, file add, or click this add button. That's usually what I click, is just that add button. And we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to go find something to import. And in this case, I'll bring in my legs. That's about the same thing. And I'll just hit OK. Same kind of stuff, you know, do you want to merge it and tessellate and all that jazz. Okay, and this one's bringing in an OBJ. This one does import Maya files also. I mean, it also imports FBX. Sometimes an FBX doesn't work, sometimes a Maya file doesn't work, and you just got to play with what your settings are inside of Maya. I don't know why it's still open. To get it to import. Okay, nothing is ever perfectly like going to work every single time. You do have to play with these things as you go. Yeah, back to VRed. All right, the other one was taking a extremely long time to open, so I just closed it out and reopened something smaller, just so it's easier. So this is a character head, and you can see that I obviously wouldn't have modeled him laying down like this, but when you add something into the scene, it comes in laying down. So I just have to go to my transform. I need to click on him, and obviously I can't click on him like this. There we go. So if I hold down Shift, it allows me to click on things. So Shift, click, I can click on him, and then I can go to my rotate, and it has these little scrollies. So I can scroll it. Now you'll see that his eyes are not going with him because his eyes are on something separate. So I do need to go to the graph, which is kind of like your outliner. And if I grab this, which is the group of the entire head stuff, and then I rotate that, you can see everything goes together. Now, one of the things that I'm not too thrilled about in this software, and it rotates, moves, and scales the same way. Whoa. There you go. It's just like he's not on the ground, where the other one was on the ground. Like here, it looks like he's actually cut through the ground. So I'm going to pull him up some, and in here, I'm sure there's a preference somewhere that sets it, but you know, we don't typically use it too often to make it a huge issue. But the Z is the up and the Y is not. So if I want to move him up and down, I just adjust the Z. Okay, so I could say move to origin, and you can see he's like cut in half. I don't want him cut in half. I want him just right on the ground. So play with it a little bit until he's on the ground, and there you go. Alright, so navigation is still essentially the same thing. Moving, zooming, panning, whatever. And it seems really sensitive because this object is super tiny. Okay, so spinning around is not a huge deal, but when I zoom in and out, it's not a big deal. When I move, he flies. Okay, so I'm going to go to my scale. Oops. My scale down here, and I'm just going to say uniform scaling's on, and just scale this up to like 20. That might be too big, but we'll see. Yeah, this. No, it's not too big. Alright, so now as I move around, you can see it's much easier than it was before. So now we'll just maybe put this up to 80, 120. There we go. So now he's pretty much on the ground there. Maybe a little bit below, but that's fine. I'd rather have him a little bit cut off. Okay, so it works very similar to the other program. We have our stuff on this side as opposed to the right side. Okay, so this is all where our items are. So perspective view, front view, side view. Here's our head. There's our environment. If we want to change something, we can just go to create. Sorry, not create. That's the other one. We can go to materials. Here we go. And then create. And then we can pick something. So in here we don't get a whole list of them. We just get this item we can pick from. And this is where we can make these specific ones. Alright. Now there is a, close some windows here. There is a material editor right here. And there's also an asset manager. And the asset manager, that's a material editor, which sets you there. Sets you actually over on the other screen. The materials here allow us to get a listing of what they are and a little preview. So it's kind of a nice way to see what they are, but they're still not as detailed as the other one was. Okay, so it is pretty sweet. So let's go to this guy, and let's say we're going to make him chrome. So here's a, this chrome looks kind of nice. So we'll give him chrome. And then let's say for his eyes are methanol. Fancy. Okay, or their milk. Okay, very quickly we can start changing and playing with what he looks like and get some pretty neat results with that. Okay, and you'll see it works very, very similar to the other one. Now, one of the downsides is as I was adding that in here, it was adding materials for each one of these, so I have to keep track of what's what. All right, now when I shift click on him, it does show, here it is, that I can hit modify and then adjust it. There's a lot more stuff happening in here than there was in the other one. So there's obviously a lot more stuff that we can use to play with this to get it to look the way we want it to look. Okay, so if I went to just the car paint, all right, so here's car paint, flip top light, there we go. All right, so here's the car paint material, and then inside that car paint material, which I have to click on and then modify, there's a bunch of stuff like flake size, like how big are the flakes, okay, to help that look more realistically. Here's roughness. Now all these are also based on UVs, so if you don't have UVs on your object, then obviously you're going to have some issues. Here's flake color 1, flake color 2, here's the base color. Except flake color. There we go. So now you can see very quickly how we can adjust and make this look more like a car paint material. I can house that right there. Just pushes everything else. Now it's really intruding, right? So same thing for environments. Here's our environments. And the neat one about these is, you know, they are a bit more realistic than the VredKeyshot ones. And you get a lot more options to what you want to do. So there's that head in the middle of a road. Pretty neat. And just like with the materials, we can go and edit the environment. Oops. Move them over. The only thing about this program is I don't really have a lot of moving room. Here we go. There's more environment stuff over here. I can click on that. Oh, I keep forgetting to click modify. So here's the shadow plane, which is this ground area. Right now we don't have really anything set up. It's just kind of like fake or just basic objects. So if I turn on my ray tracing, I'll actually start to get shadows and reflections inside here. And if I turn on my anti-aliasing, it'll actually start to smooth out some of these edges a bit more. Okay, now he already was blocky, so you have to kind of forgive the blockiness of it and just look at what's happening here. Let me go back to that car paint. And I'm going to I'm just going to try to find something that's a little bit more reflective. So I'm just going to make a chrome material, just drop it on him. There we go. Now I want to see the background. I want to see how it's reflecting inside of him. That's what I wanted to see. And then that car paint that we have, I'll just put that in the eyes. There we go. All right, so all this stuff we can edit. So we can go to that Pacific Road and go to the dome, and I should be able to click on those. It's not letting me click on them. Remove unused materials is always a good one to do. Get rid of everything you're not using. There we go. So I modify this. There we go. That's what I didn't click on, is that modify. Shadow plane visible, so there is or isn't a shadow plane there, which is helpful. I can just turn it off completely if I want to. I can edit the light studio stuff, so actually how it's lighting it. I can adjust my exposure to make it brighter or make it dimmer or change the hue. So you see all these extra settings that we get inside here that we don't get in the other one, which is obviously extremely handy to have when you're working with this. We also have inside here, if this goes too slow, you can always downscale it too, which means just make it a smaller image, which goes a bit quicker. We could also do a region. So it says hold R and drag with the left mouse button. So that way it's only affecting just this area here and nothing else outside. We can see the wireframe on here if we need to. We could make a backplate if we want a different backplate, which is this background image. I'll typically use isolate. Alright, so that's typically like all you're playing with here. And then on a lot of these, where's my assets? I closed it. Oh, we also have texture editor too, so we can actually create textures and drop them on there. Scene. Asset manager is up. Must be behind something. Oops. I'm in Maya mode now, where I'm trying to spin and move around like Maya. There we go. Okay. Oh, there it is. Alright, geometry and materials, that. Oh. Alright. So here's where we could add textures in here. So like our bump texture, we could say use a texture. We could link to one that we already have. So in this case, I have, that's a normal map right there. I could just drop it on. It wouldn't apply to this because this is a totally different file. But it would allow me to add some bump into him. Crap, wrong one. And make this bump happen a little bit more. Now he doesn't really have UVs laid out on him. There we go. So let's wait and see what this looks like. But you can definitely see there's some more movement happening inside the surface there. Okay, so there are that ability to create some textures on here. So if you made a texture inside Maya or Photoshop and you want to bring it in, you can bring it in from there. There you go. So this is a plastic material I created just by clicking here and going to plastic. And then for the diffuse texture, I just dropped an image I had of a waterfall. So it's not terribly difficult to just kind of play with these textures. And then once I added it onto him, then I had the ability to go here and to start playing with how this is actually being projected onto the guy. So if I did planar, I'll get these planar controls that I can adjust. If I hold shift, I can move that around and just relay out how that shows up on him. And then I can go back to my material here and start to play with the glossy colors. I can just take the glossiness down or pull it up, take the roughness, take the reflectivity. Okay, and I can just customize the entire thing based on that. Now here's the neat thing that's, I mean, typically you're not going to be doing loads and loads and loads of texturing in here. You may have some items that are texture, but not like everything. Turn the region off. I'm just going to frame the guy here, spin around. Alright, so the neat thing about this is the render settings. So if I go under to the render layers, rendering render layers, it pulls up this thing, and then we could have actual render layers where we turn stuff on and turn stuff off, which KeyShot does not have, which is pretty neat. Then we also have lights, so we could actually create physical lights inside of our scene and have them emitting. We have ambient occlusion. We can play with the ambient occlusion settings. We have camera editor, so we can edit our cameras, lights editor. So if we do create a light, we can add it there. I'm going to turn this downscaling off. We could change our rendering. Right now it's set to realistic, so you could actually go through and do just ambient occlusion rendering, just indirect illumination, just non-photorealistic. You could do stereo rendering. Lots of different things you can do inside of this one compared to the other one. So I go to my render settings now. Inside here, I can set some other stuff up. So if I go to current, sure, I'm going to change this to an EXR. I'm going to set this to 1920 by 1080. Any still images, I like to, that's like my low is 1920 by 1080. If it's a test, maybe I'll go higher or lower. But typically that's, if I'm putting this on the web, I want it to be like that. If I'm printing it, it's going to be a lot bigger. So you can see here's UHDB 7680, DCI, 4K, those. Here's some printing defaults. Alright, you can just type it in too if you're printing it, and you know I need an 8-inch. Pull my calculator. 8 times 2.54 is 20.32. So we're working in centimeters. 32. I know I went 8. Yeah, 8, that's right. And then 25.4 centimeters there. Okay, so 8 by 10 is what this is. And pixels per inch, 300. So that gives me 2400 pixels by 3000 pixels. Okay. So that's how we could print at a bigger resolution if we're actually printing this off. So I'm setting it to be just the 1920 for this. Full global illuminations, this is like everything. Everything's good to go. Render quality, production, super sampling on, export alpha channel. Here's the animation stuff. Here's render pass stuff. Look at all the render pass stuff that we can set up. So we can do like transparency if we have it, background, color, diffuse color, glossy color, specular color. So we really get the ability, if I jump to Nuke real quick, here's this rendering that I did. I can go through and I can play with just the color information on individual items. Okay, so these are all render passes that came out of there. Here is, what is this one? The glossy light. So this is just like the lighting information from it. The mask didn't show up in this one. Material ID didn't show up in that one. Here's my normal pass. Here's my ambient occlusion. Here's my position pass. We can do other stuff with that. And then I could also render it out like this. So here's this tentacle that I had. And I rendered it out with the background transparent, where here the background's there. And then I could pre-multiply it. And then you'll see that I get just this tentacle with this shadow and reflection. And so when I pre-multiply it and view it on top of a constant, look at that. It's kind of neat. Okay, so there's lots of stuff that we can do inside there. So typically, you want to play around with these things. Like I want occlusion, I want masks. And this is under the combined, not separated channels. I want depth. Beauty path, sure. A lot of these is just like, click them all. See what you get. Some of these are just going to be dead. Just close. Or go to the general settings, see there's more samples. I changed my filter to length zones. Everything there should be good. Everything there should be good. I do want to make sure that my environment, let me go back to my asset manager. Oops, not the asset manager. The other one. Material editor. I want to make sure that my environment that I have here has some transparency on it. There it is. So is visible. I don't need it to be visible. Now if you do turn this off, you may see that like your reflections go away, but in this case they're not, because of how it's set up. Shadow plane visible, I could turn that off. I want that to be on. Alright, so that's good there. My shadow opacity is transparent, that's what I want. Reflection, there we go, diffuse and glossy. That's what I was looking for, is a reflection. So now the shadow floor here should be reflective, which it is. Now you can see the reflection. And I could crank up that reflectivity. And if I want it sharper, I pull this roughness down. If I want it softer, I can pull that up. Okay, there we go. All right, so now when I go to render settings and I hit render, it's going to actually go through, and where do you want to save this? I'll save it to my desktop. Test render.exr. And then it'll go through and do an actual rendering of this. And then you can just bring this into Nuke or into Photoshop. And then you can play with what all of these things are doing inside here. If you're more comfortable with Photoshop, then use Photoshop. Okay, you would just think of each one of these things as, okay, here's my base image. I want to use my ambient occlusion. So you find your ambient occlusion. And I just merge those together, and I'm just going to set this to multiply. So now I have the ambient occlusion knocked on top of there. Now I don't have the other stuff set up, so these are the issues you run into as you start playing with this, okay? In that we have our beauty pass right here. I have my ambient occlusion, and when I multiply them together, we get this, but we don't get the rest of that background, okay? So if I just look at this, I hit A, I actually have an alpha channel inside here. So I could actually take this and pre-multiply it to apply the alpha channel, then multiply it on top of there, right? And then I could go back to I need to, right now it's still black around here, and when I pre-multiply it's still black around there. I need to merge it first into a white image. Basically I just need to make an all white one. So I'm going to my constant, making a white constant and merging that, and what we should get out of this one, not multiply, just do an over. And I need to set my constant to be the same size, so I set this to 1920. There we go, 1919 by 1080. There's some weird number where it comes in kind of just like a pixel off. But now look at this as completely white, and then we get that. And so now if I take this and I multiply it times that, now we get our background, and we get the ambient occlusion just knocked on top of there. So here's the original image, and there's the one with ambient occlusion. Okay, so it is sometimes you just have to play with this to figure out, okay, I have this, how do I get these to work together correctly? Now in Photoshop, we could have just deleted the background out, okay, using its own alpha channel. So we'll show that real quick. So desktop, image occlusion, no, there it is, and then beauty. Those are the two that we're dealing with inside of Nuke. And I'm just saying use each as an alpha channel. Okay, so in this case, I can control click the alpha in my channels inside Photoshop. Okay, and that selects the item. I double click my background. I click on my mask, and it gives me this. So then I can take this and duplicate the layer and send it over to my beauty. So there it is on top. So then I can just multiply. Now we essentially have the same thing we just did inside of Nuke. Exact same thing. Okay? And then we can do stuff like do the blur gallery thing. Okay, or we can say, you know what, I really don't care for the background. I wish I could just isolate this on its own and have that just on its own. So just knowing what I know about Photoshop, if there's a way for me to isolate something, I can take full advantage of that. So in this case, let me just duplicate that. I'm going to delete the layer mask. I'm going to set this back to normal. And if you look at, oops, I did a bad thing. When I did that iris blur, I blurred just the top layer. I didn't blur everything. This is something I want to do after all this other stuff is done. So I'm going to delete the layer mask. So I undid my blur, I delete the layer mask, set this back to normal. And so this image is essentially black and white. Okay, if I use my levels on this, there it goes. And I pull my whites all the way up like this. There we go. And then I can use my magic wand I could use my I don't know why the magic wand doesn't work in this mode, and this does. Whatever. There we go. So I just use the paint selection tool, or a quick selection tool, to select all that stuff. And I could go to invert my selection. Oops, actually don't invert the selection, just delete. There we go. Okay, so this layer is essentially just flat, just that image. So if I take this below that one, I use the Alt key, click that. So you'll see what I have here now is that using that Alt key, I've basically created a clipping mask so that this layer only shows what's in there. And if I were to create a new background, drop this below that, and just for sake of ease, I'll just make a gradient. So you see how I just made a gradient here, and the shadow from this one, from the ambient occlusion, comes into that. So it actually looks like I have a shadow on top of that. All right. So you really have to think of this as an asset base where you're just using these individual pieces as assets and say, okay, I want this to happen, I want that to happen, I want whatever to happen. How do I get that to look the way I want it to look? And it literally is just a matter of playing around with these things and kind of looking at what we can get out of it. The ambient occlusion adds some nice depth to it. Okay, so you can see under here it's a little bit too bright. So the AO adds some brightness in there. Now, because it's a still 2, I could say, well, you know, I wish this was maybe a little bit darker on the bottom. So I could go to my layer up here, make a brand new layer, and just go in with my brush tool. And I'm not doing this very nicely here. I'm just kind of painting in this area where, let's say I want just a little bit more shadow happening. And then I could take this, and I'm going to control click this layer, and I'll click on that and just hit delete. And so now I've created more of a shadow down here that I've just painted in and then adjusted. So again, it's kind of neat how we can play with this stuff. It's not like you render it out and it's done. You really need to render it and play with it and customize what that end look is going to be. Okay? All right, this is still creating this image. That beep means it's done. All right, we still have texturing stuff inside here. We still have transforms, rulers, grids. There's a whole lot more stuff inside of VRed that we can play with. You could even save some of this stuff. I haven't done it before, but somewhere you can save this or publish it, and you could put it into VRed presenter, and people could spin around your model and do exactly like this and see what it looks like from all these different angles. So that's another way that you could kind of play with your settings. All right, so that's just a quick overview of the process of getting your stuff from Maya into VRed, into KeyShot, and playing with those and seeing how you can customize those settings.